Welcome to Talk to Brazil with Tom Reaoch, the business connector to business in Brazil. Welcome to Talk to Brazil, the business connection, a leading business podcast about business in the world. I'm Tom Reaoch, an American known as the King of Networking, connecting people from my podcast studio in Brazil. Today's guest is Irina Castellano, and she's joining us from Sydney, Australia. Irina Castellano is a certified coach, speaker, and accredited foster carer and care teacher, community services, mental health facilitator, and author of a chapter in the book, Elevate Your Performance. So Irina, there's a lot of talk about wellness and mental health today in business. And you as an authorized foster care provider, dedicated to providing safe homes for vulnerable children, what are some of the trials, tribulations, and joy that you have experienced on the foster and adoptive journey?
Thank you for having me on your podcast, Tom. I very much appreciate it. And yes, good evening from the other side of the world in Sydney. And yeah, we've been doing this now for 22 years. And when I say we, it's my family and I. And we have been doing this for 22 years. We've had about 70 children come through our home. And we also have adopted 2 children along the way that couldn't be reunited, because fostering is all about reuniting the kids with their birth family, and 2 couldn't be reunited. So we also adopted these children. And
yeah, so it's a journey for the children. It's transitional.
Yes, definitely. And unfortunately, some kids come into care because they cannot live in a safe home with their own family. And they come into care, and so often they have to change homes for so many reasons, not necessarily because of their behavior or anything, but it could be so many reasons why they have to move on. Maybe the carer is, posted somewhere else or whatever. And kids sometimes hop in the system and have 10, 15, 20 different families before they actually reach the age of 18. So when these kids come into care, I think one of the things I've realized over the years that is very typical is that they do struggle with emotional regulation, that they have not learned how to regulate themselves or even to name the emotions. So once you name it, then you can tame it, as they say. So the kids, they don't know why they're being sad or why they're being angry or why they're frustrated, and they don't have names for it. So therefore, it's very hard for them to recognize it's the same feeling coming up. And once you give a name and you give them strategies, it's really beautiful to see when they have a way of healing from
within. When we say that we're talking really about vulnerable children, and you're talking from Australia, this is not an Australian challenge. It's a global challenge.
Yes.
It's the same thing everywhere. And it seems to be, from what I've seen and heard, it's difficult, first of all, to find persons like yourself who want to help children who are vulnerable.
This is why I've been so keen to also be on your podcast, even though it is in Brazil and, others I've done with England and so on. It is a global issue. And unfortunately, still not enough people know about it. And yes, the foster system might be a little bit different from country to country. But overall, I think we're all desperate for people to say, hey, yeah, I can do this. I can open up my home. I've got an extra spare bedroom. Yes, let me take these kids in. And in Australia, we actually have 47,000 kids in care.
47,000?
And throughout the last 22 years, it's always fluctuated between 45,000 and 47,000. So really, it's never changed much. And we are, at the moment, we're in need of 4,000 homes that we don't have. And it is so bad that we actually even have children and often sibling groups. And, we're talking about sibling groups of 3, 5, 8, 11 that are actually stuck in motel rooms because we do not have enough foster carers. So this is my reason for actually now trying to raise awareness on this topic. And this is why I wrote my book chapter, and I'm more than happy to give that away for free. So anybody that contacts me through LinkedIn, I would love to give them all the book for them to understand what fostering is, what it means, and also how it's changed in Australia. A lot of people think that you can't even adopt in Australia, but even that has been more streamlined. You can now be an authorized foster carer and an adoptive parent. And that is something that I would love to see all over the world.
Well, that's
That
exactly, then, if I understand correctly, that's what you are. You have adopted children.
Yeah, but it
And
was
you
the long way around.
and you continue to offer foster care.
Yeah, but it was the long way around, because when we started fostering 22 years ago, it was separate. It was, fostering over here and adoption totally somewhere else. So even when the child that came to us, she was 5 months, she was a little girl, 5 months, she came to us, and she was supposed to only stay 3-4 months and then be reunited. And then the 3-4 months passed, and then it dragged out to 10 months. And then after 18 months, it was decided, okay, she's not going home. And then we thought, oh, okay, if she now comes up for adoption, she's going to go all the way over there to the adoption department, and then we will be a part of her life. But it has changed since then, and they were really great in then saying, look, the child is happy, you're happy with the child, so we want to offer you, are you happy to keep her until the age of 18, or maybe even adopt? And we were like, yes, of course we would adopt her, So it wasn't so obvious, and it took us still quite a long time. It took us about 5 years to get the adoption through. But once the child is in your house and you have passports and you can still travel and all of that, it wasn't so much. It was just, a paper being sorted in the meantime, in the background. But now it is more streamlined, and that's what a lot of people don't know. A lot of people really still think that adoption in Australia is very, very hard. And yes, in maybe some states it's again different. It's unfortunately not the same in all the states in Australia or territories.
Well, and in the world, it's the same thing. It's a I would say a challenging process anywhere.
Yeah, but we need to understand.
I've spoken to other people here. There's a lot of trafficking, and I obviously get to the dark side of life. And so I think governments are keenly aware that they have to be very careful when dealing with vulnerable children, because we just said they're vulnerable. Many times they don't even know why they're in that situation.
But it
really
is
don't
tougher
understand what's happening with them, right?
Yeah, but it is tougher when it is adoptions that are, dealing with overseas agencies per se. So when it is within the country, at least in Australia, the children that are in the foster care system, I mean, it's very streamlined, and we know how they got there, and how long they will be staying there, in the sense, will they be reunited or not? Because that has also now been streamlined. The children who are in care in Australia should only be in care for up to 2 years. And then it should be decided if they are either going into long-term care and then have permanency in that, like either in that family or in another permanent placement, or that they do come up for adoption, or they do come up for guardianship.
Let me understand what you just said. So for the first, let's say, challenges that you were offered, you don't get to pick and choose, right? They offer a child to you.
Well, unfortunately, you do get to pick and choose in many ways, because it also needs to fit to your circumstances in the family.
Right.
So what they are trying,
guess, right? Okay.
From that sense, yes. And because we have so many kids that need a home, you can literally pick and choose, which is not necessarily what we would like. And then again, we can still not find enough carers. So yes, you can say, if you would like a child under 5, over 5, you can pick and choose and put your preference in for girl, boy. You can say that you are happy to take sibling groups. It's pretty much, you can pick and choose, and you can put your preferences in. Of course, the more preferences you put in, then maybe the longer you do have to wait to find a perfect match. But if you are open and you say, look, any child will do, any age will do. And then, of course, it also depends if you have your own children already.
Right.
So we always try to make them 2 years younger than your last child, just so that we can keep the hierarchy and that the children feel as if, they are looking after that one that comes added to the family.
But what you're saying then is that it's not a personal decision on your part. It's a family decision on the part of the family. So the picking and choosing may not be the correct word. It's really adapting the correct fit.
And also, you need to have everybody on board. There is no way that I can do this, just because, see, how it all started was that I read a book at the age of 15, which was called A Child Called It by Dave Pelzer, who wrote about his story being abused by his own biological mother. And I was so shocked by that book. It really stayed with me. And I thought, one day when I'm older and when I have my own kids, I'm also going to foster and maybe even adopt. Then, I went into
that was when you were 15?
15. I read that actually when I was in the States. I'm actually already an expat child, so I moved a lot. I lived in 8 different countries. So in the States, I read that book and I thought, no matter where I'll be one day, I'm going to foster, have my own kids, and maybe even adopt. And then it took me a few years. So I went into hospitality, I went into aviation, and it took me a while to find my prince. So when I found my now husband, I also kind of didn't mention it before we got married, but then when we did get married, he was Australian. That's why I'm here in Australia, because I'm German. And my husband then traveled a lot. He traveled 200 days a year. And because of my visa status, I wasn't allowed to work. So I was like, what do I do? And I was opening all these local papers and it said, would you like to be a foster carer? And in Australia, this is also a thing a lot of people don't know, but in Australia, we actually don't have any orphanages.
No.
So when kids are removed...
Well, so that's news to me, because then there are
there are no orphanages. And there's a reason for it, because of, Australia does have a history that is not so great. And I can't talk since I'm German. And I guess every country has something. But in Australia, there's, of course, this big generational trauma within the Aboriginal community and the Torres Strait Islanders. So the stolen generation in Australia had the experience of orphanages when the kids were taken from their families. And so therefore that was abolished. There are no more orphanages in Australia. But then, of course, it makes it hard that when you have the kids come into care, where do you put them if you don't have any foster homes?
Right.
So this is why we are really desperate for foster carers, and having them now in motel rooms is the last thing we want, because that does not give them stability and does not let them be
back to the point of orphanages, and I can't say if it's good, bad, or indifferent. I think the choice should be to put children with a family that helps them adjust.
Yeah, it's the best way to heal, because you have a family environment and you have a room to call your own and you have siblings to play with. And, that's what we would hope for.
Now we're talking about a personal level, and really we said it's a personal decision, it's a family decision. But looking out in today's world, we're looking out into businesses and companies and corporations, and more recently it's in the headlines of wellness and well-being, and mental health has become an issue. Many companies, I feel, aren't aware of really what has happened, even to their employees. Their employees may have had a vulnerable childhood, may have been in a foster care situation, may have had difficulties adjusting, and some of those are taken forward into companies. Companies don't adapt well. I think, this is Tom Reaoch speaking, it's a challenge to have their own workers adapt to what they call their culture. And then they wake up and say, we got a problem. So how does that fit? Because I'm sure we have today parents like yourselves who may have children that are foster care, all right, as you have an obligation to care for those children, but you may be working in a company. And you may have to take a day off or 2 days off, or more days off, right, to adjust the situations from those children. How do you see that today in today's world?
I must say that a few things in Australia have changed. So, for example, if you do adopt a child, some companies here now give adoption leave for the child to be settled. If you do become a foster carer, some companies actually also give you, not many, unfortunately yet, but some do give you time off too. And also now you can have parental leave in terms of, woman having the leave as well as a father having a leave then. So it has there's still a long way to go,
Yeah,
and
because
it
when
would
you
be
use the
wonderful.
word some is some. It's not everybody. It's not all
That's
companies.
true.
It's some.
Yeah.
So the awareness in what you're doing is to help raise the awareness, not only among parents or possible caregivers, but also companies.
Correct. There's still a long way to go, but that's why I'm also trying to raise awareness about fostering, because a lot of people don't even talk about it. A lot of people don't even know how many kids are in care here in Australia or how many homes we need. So that in itself needs to be a bit higher up there. Also, we know that, sometimes people have had miscarriages, and I had a miscarriage. I had a stillborn. That was not my reason for fostering, but it would be wonderful if people who have had, unfortunately, the experience of miscarriage or stillborn see a potential of creating a family through other ways.
Right.
It's an unusual way of creating it, but I've also, for example, done IVF, and I've had a child through IVF, but I also had unsuccessful IVF cycles. So I told you at 15, I knew I wanted to have my own children, foster and adopt. I just didn't know in which order. And I didn't realize that, falling pregnant was maybe taking a bit more time than thought. So I would love to work together also with IVF clinics, so that if they have clients that have been unsuccessful
Right.
and can medically not continue, or have other reasons for not continuing, that they are given the option to grieve, to let that settle, but then maybe to consider fostering, because we've got plenty of kids that need homes. And that should be something that maybe everybody all over the world should be starting to work with. We know that infertility is on a rise.
Right.
Doesn't mean that we don't have kids that need homes.
Right.
So, if we could put those two together, it would be just fantastic all over the world, not just in Australia.
Well, what's fantastic is to see what you're doing. And now you've reached a point of you have gone through this journey that you mentioned, but now you come to being a care teacher, a foster carer, but also a facilitator in community services and mental health. So it's rather expansive. So your focus today in coaching is pretty ample. You're helping persons, families, men, women, at the same time organizations, to see how that can fit, and hopefully in the future corporations, to have you come on as a speaker and just talk about that. Because many times this isn't talked about. It's just not, it's not brought forth. And
Exactly.
corporations and companies today are made up of a bunch of people. And those people can have their challenges, they could have had them, but they could also be the persons that you need to help care for others.
Yeah, I would love to do that. And my teaching, or even taking an interest in doing a diploma in community services, and then also now teaching certificates and diplomas in that area, is all about connecting people, and about also a lot about trauma-informed care that I'm really passionate about. And that's how I got into the coaching, because I did, the neuro change practitioner, and to learn about neuroscience and how the brain can heal from trauma, because I always found it puzzling that, I had maybe sibling groups and each child was handling what I thought the same events differently. But it really had an impact on them, because it depended on at what age it started, and also how much of it they were a part of. And to see how each child deals with it differently, that's the bit that really got me into learning more. And that's how I would love to help anybody who is trying to cope with these children, and what triggers them, and how they can heal from inside out.
Well, that's important. You mentioned the word trauma, because we're talking about vulnerable children, but they've all been traumatized.
Well, you're removing a child from everything they've ever known.
They may not even know it, but in any case of being separated, or why they were separated, and that's a trauma in itself.
Exactly. So that you take a child from everything they've ever known, and from one night to the next, they are sleeping somewhere else, and they've got different people, different households, different rules. That in itself is a trauma.
But then that's the challenge. And for you as a person, every child is different, right?
Yeah, definitely. Even though I can see that emotional regulation is something that pretty much affects almost all the children, you can see how much consistency, routine, and just being non-judgmental and just learning from them. They have taught me so much in terms of seeing why they're triggered by what they're triggered. I mean, it takes time to figure out what makes them tick and what gets them upset, or, just to see why they do what they do, because there's a reason for everything. Every time a child plays up or every time a child has an emotional outburst, it comes from somewhere. It's never from nothing.
Our emotional outbursts come from somewhere.
Yeah.
That's everybody.
But to work out, but to see where it actually comes from and why they do what they do, this is the challenging side for me. But it's also so beautiful to see when routine and boundaries and being there for them, to be that person that they can trust and that they can always rely on no matter what, and to see what changes you can actually achieve in the children is just really beautiful.
Well, on the joy side, so you have helped over 70 children move on one way or the other, right? So I would guess there has to be a lot of personal satisfaction, family satisfaction, and personally to you, to being able to realize your dream and when you were 15.
Yeah, and I'd never thought that it would, be a big part of my life, and so big that I even have 2 children that, are adopted and from different countries, different parents, and how we all make it work. And to see the compassion in my children's eyes when these kids come at short notice or in the middle of the night, and how they can understand that, these more settled kids, what issues they have are nothing compared to what these kids have when they come with literally the clothes on their back and nothing much. It makes them more compassionate. It makes them see what also a one-night stand, the consequences of that. And children that, we had babies that needed morphine because they came from pregnancies that involved drugs. So we had to wean them off the drugs. And, then you have to get up every 6 hours and you have to give them morphine to just make the dosage lower and lower so that they can be weaned off. And for them to see what drugs can do to the unborn baby and then to the born baby, it's really, I find it fantastic for your own biological children to see what other kids go through, and the compassion and the empathy that they have developed through this. I think that is another really big plus point.
Well, I hope you continue, and I'm sure you will be continuing on your journey.
As long as I can do it. And as long as my family sticks with me and does it with me, yes.
Well, and they've come along this way, but I think that the challenge is to attract more people to do the same thing.
Yes, that would be just phenomenal.
And my focus of networking, when I talk about networking, really is to create allies. Because we and you are in that. We become an army of one. And when we're an army of one, we need allies. And they can come in any way, shape, or form. So the more you can say, the more you can talk, the more you can make people aware. That's to the personal level, to the corporate level. Hopefully reduce that number from 45,000 to something less.
I would like to really bring it down and have homes waiting for these children if they do get removed. I just don't ever want any kids to end up in motel rooms. There should be a home waiting for them the minute they are removed from their houses.
Well, hopefully we're back in the future talking about this again, and you'll be sharing that story, okay?
That would be wonderful. I so appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today, Tom. Much appreciated.
No, and I appreciate, and I'm sure many other people do, and certainly 70 children do, if not more, of what you're doing, what your family's doing. So extend that thanks to your family, because it might be more of a challenge to them than you, because you're just following your dream. You've sold your dream to other people.
Yeah, and I don't underestimate that. I really, really appreciate it from the bottom of my heart for my family that they have supported me with this. And, we're now taking different breaks here and there, but we still do respite, we still do emergency. And to be honest, I could have been placed with 2 kids tonight. But I said, no, I've got this podcast now.
I'll call them back.
So I hope they have found it.
give them a call and say we're done, okay?
Yeah. Let's hope they have found a home, but that's how desperate they are.
Well, Irina, thank you again, and congratulations on what you're doing, okay?
Thank you. Thank you so much for this.
And for our listeners, you can find more about Irina Castellano, and it's Irina, the last name Castellano. You'll find her on LinkedIn. So that's Irina Castellano on LinkedIn. I'd like to thank our audience and our sponsor, Focus MI Market Intelligence. Focus MI specializes in market research for the Brazilian agricultural market. More about them on their site, www.focusmi.com. Remember, when you talk to Tom, you talk to Brazil and the world. Goodbye, and thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to Tom Reaoch on Talk to Brazil, the business connector to Brazil.